Hello, this is Tamko, and in today's Q&A session we will explore what instrument track, effect track and drum rack in Ableton Live are. Even though it was asked as one question, they're actually three different things. But since the original question combined all three, we'll cover them all together. This will not be an in-depth tutorial, but rather a broad overview of what they are and how to use them. The short answer, instrument track and effect track are like folders in Ableton Live, where you can group VST instruments or effects to send a shared signal or to control them together with macros. In turn, drum rack is basically a drum sampler implemented in Ableton Live. To delve into the details, let's switch to the screen. So we'll start with the instrument track. It's used to control multiple VST instruments from a single MIDI track so that they play simultaneously. First method to create an instrument track. Drag the first instrument to a regular MIDI track. Choose the preset you need. Great, this one is fine. Now we want to add another instrument here. If we simply drag it, Live will replace the first instrument with the second. This is not what we want. Let's undo that action, right-click on the instrument and select Group. An instrument track is automatically created. There is a button here to expand it and take a look. We see complete control here. Now we can drag a second instrument like pigments. Temporarily disable complete here and choose a preset for pigments. Maybe a pad. There it is, it sounds. Now, if we re-enable complete, they will play simultaneously. I chose instruments that are easy to distinguish. The piano keys hit first, followed by the pad sound. Actually, they start playing simultaneously, but the piano has a faster attack and pads develop slowly. We can add a third layer. Take Vital, disable the other instruments, leave only Vital and choose an SFX preset. There it is. Now let's enable everything together. We have volume levels here to adjust the balance. Let's record something. Let's lower the volume for Vital. And maybe increase the piano volume. So we've created an instrument track. You also can create it in an alternative way. Create another MIDI track, go to Instruments, select Instrument Track and drag it to the track as an empty rack. When expanded, there is nothing inside. Now we start dragging instruments here in the same way. We won't repeat the procedure as the principle remains the same. Now let's create an effect track for this same track. The principle is similar. Select Audio Effects and take, for example, an equalizer. Cut the low frequencies of our signal. Now we want to create an effect track. Let's add overdrive here. And maybe a modulator. Pitch modulation, preset, phaser, flanger. There you go. Now we want to create a new and single knob that will control several parameters simultaneously. So you only need to adjust one knob to manage the low cut frequency, the overdrive and the phase. This can be done with an effect track. Select all three plugins with Shift, right-click, Group. They are now inside an effect track. So it's essentially the same. The interface is identical, but this one is called an instrument track because it holds VST instruments, and this one is called an effect track because it holds effects. But the concept is the same. This part can be hidden if not needed. The top part with macros is more interesting. This knob is currently empty, but we can link different parameters from the plugins inside this effect rack. For example, click on the frequency and map to macro 1. Now we see the frequency linked to this macro. Right-click to the drive level, link it to the same macro 1. Now this knob controls both frequency and drive level. Let's link the flanger amount to macro 1. Now one knob controls 3 parameters. To configure it, use the Map button. Click it to see linked parameters and set specific values. For instance, I want the low cut frequency to go up to 200 Hz in the rightmost position. Set the max value to 200. And now the knob stops at 200 Hz. Do the same for overdrive, limiting drive to 20% at max. And with the flanger, we can do something interesting. By default, when our macro is at 0, the amount of flanger also moves to the left. So, macro to the left, and here also to the left. Now to the right, and here also to the right. We can click here and press invert. Now when my first macro is at the far right, this knob moves to the far left. We can also limit these values, for example, to only 50%. Let's hide mapping mode for clarity and see how it works. As you have already guessed, we can link parameters in the same way in instrument tracks. We can control complete, pigments or vital parameters with macros. Let's try this. For example, select complete, open it, and we need a parameter we tweak here to appear over there. To do this, simply select any knob that interests us, like the level knob, and turn it. It appears here immediately, whereas it wasn't there before. We can also turn, for example, the mix knob, and it will appear as well. Let's go back to the previous one. Here is our level knob. Right-click on it, map to macro 1. Now the level parameter is assigned to this macro. Open Pigments. Choose another parameter, say Filter Mix. And it will appear as well. Link it to macro 1. Now let's open both Complete and Pigments at the same time. Look here first, and then over there. Turn out macro and see that both knobs move just like they did with the effects. Without changing settings, let's talk about automation. Let's minimize here and here, leaving everything as it is. We've already done some work, and we'll add an LFO effect here. In Ableton Live 11, it's located in Audio Effects. In Live 12, it is located in a new special section called Modulators. Anyway, we can simply drag it right here. A sine wave is generated, and we can now map it to any button we need. Click the Map button and then click the macro. Now we see that the sine wave controls our macro. If we play the track and expand the rect, we will see our parameters, frequency, drive and amount, adjusting according to this sine wave from 0 to 100%. If we, for example, reduce the depth of this sine wave, we'll get weaker oscillations. We can change the phase, increase the frequency of these oscillations, decrease the frequency of these oscillations, link this to another macro, link it to the first macro that controls the instrument, expand it and see what's happening with our complete here. and what's happening with pigments. Let's try linking it to wavetable and listen to how it affects the signal. Let's drag the wavetable position back and forth and link it to the first macro. And play around with the sine wave. Just look at how many parameters we can tweak simultaneously, all thanks to the instrument rack or effect rack. Let's link this LFO back to the effect macro. And I want to emphasize that there is no strict rule that one parameter can only be linked to one macro. We can link another effect to the very same first macro. For example, let's choose the high cut filter and link it to the first macro. Map to macro 1. Now we see that two parameters are controlled by one macro from one plugin. We can also select Map, change the value, but this time, to avoid a harsh cut, we limit the minimum value and listen to how it affects our signal. Similarly, we can link tone here and so on. Another parameter like dry-wet for the phaser can be linked to the second macro and controlled separately. It all depends on your imagination. The last thing I wanted to cover regarding effects is manual automation. Drag our MIDI loop, press Tab to switch to arrangement view, drop the loop here, zoom it in, and play it from arrangement view instead of session view. Let's delete this LFO. And now we want to draw the automation manually. Press the A key to access automation and select our effect rack. Here we have parameters available, one of which is the first macro. Now we can manually draw any signal changes for this macro. For example, disable grid snapping and draw any changes you want. Zoom in to draw more frequent changes, otherwise it's hard to hear what's happening. Alternatively, turn grid snapping back on and use the preset shapes. So I select a section of the track, right-click to create a sine wave, and then duplicate it with the Command-D shortcut. You can then make further manual adjustments as needed, and so on. Again, you understand the principle here, it all depends on your imagination. And the last question, which isn't directly related to the previous two, is what is drum rack? Drum rack, as I mentioned earlier, is basically a standard drum sampler implemented in Ableton Live. Create a MIDI track, go to Instruments, and here is the drum rack. If we drag an empty drum rack here, it creates a basic 4x4 grid by default. However, there are multiple so-called banks available, and we have many of them. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, actually there are a total of 8, and we can simply add one-shot drum samples here. Go to the samples, choose any of them, for example, kick, and drag it here. Then take snare and drag it here. Hi-hat, drag it here, and for example, crash. Drag it here. Now, when I play on the MIDI keyboard in this range, that is C note, C sharp, the kick is on C, then the snare is on C sharp, hi-hat is on D, and F sharp is crash. In this way, I can distribute these samples across the entire MIDI keyboard or create a similar drum rack in another way. Go to Drums, remove the search filter, and here we have pre-made kits created by Ableton. Choose any of them and drag it either to an empty space to automatically create a track with a pre-made drum rack, or drag it to an existing track to replace what we created earlier. The principle will be exactly the same. Why is this entity called drum rack? Because it essentially works the same way. We see the same grouping of instruments and the same chain, where we have separate audio tracks or instruments, the ability to enable, disable them, and the ability to control their volume. Actually, instrument track, effect track, and drum rack allow for way more than I've shown here. But since the original question was what are they, I think I've covered it. Thank you for watching, I hope this video was useful. Write your questions in the comments and maybe I'll cover it in the next videos.